I'm genuinely delighted to be chairing this panel and really grateful for the invitation. And I'm particularly delighted to have the opportunity to hear our speakers talk about their research. As well as being impressive in their own right, taken together, the speakers you're about to hear are exemplars of what can be achieved when the arts and humanities work in partnerships with the sciences. That feels like a weird division to say still, after many years of it being the case. And it seems like it should be an accepted view that the arts and humanities and the social sciences and the sciences would all work together. It would seem obvious that socio-technical problems require multidisciplinary solutions. But we know that in practice, this happens less often than we'd like. Recent advances in generative AI are perhaps the best known example of what happens when we fail to do this. By designing tools that scrape the internet for training data, companies developing AI image generation tools essentially undermine the artists, creative practitioners, and curators who made their work available on the internet for the enrichment of the public. And no one saw it coming, not the artists, not the regulators, certainly not us academics or the public. But what would have happened had those creative practitioners, the content providers, the curators, been involved in the design of those systems? What would those tools have looked like? Could we have avoided what's since been described by some of the greatest art heists in history? At the very least, we could have mitigated some of those risks. The idea that the arts, creative industries and heritage sector are passive in the age of AI was a prominent one, but one that's rapidly changing. Our speakers will all present examples for how machine learning and machine-assisted models can enhance practice in the GLAM sector. And this partnership between the arts and sciences is something that I'm personally passionate about and something that my own work seeks to address, which is why I was kindly invited to chair this panel. I co-direct an Arts and Humanities Research Council programme called BRAID, which stands for Bridging Responsible AI Divides, which has this notion of multidisciplinarity at its core. Tricky word. The purpose of BRAID is to enhance the responsible AI ecosystem in the UK by drawing knowledge from the arts and humanities more deeply into the governance, design, development and deployment of AI through a programme of funding, events, training and research. So far, we've funded around 20 projects, mostly academic-led. And we also have one live call, which is a series of innovation fellowships co-funded by the British Academy, as well as a commissioning call for artists to respond to the social issues arising from AI, which will be launching in mid-October. So keep an eye out for that. By drawing the arts and humanities more closely into the AI ecosystem, we've observed 3 challenges that will be of no surprise to those in the room. The first is that there are still challenges around developing parity of esteem within the arts and humanities and scientific knowledge when it comes to AI, even though both of those, all of the disciplines under those 2 umbrellas are invested in the AI ecosystem. The second is that there remains semantic and methodological barriers between the arts and humanities and traditional scientific disciplines. And thirdly, that truly multidisciplinary practice takes more work and feels far riskier than traditional approaches. This is starting to change. Our speakers today work at the cutting edge of multidisciplinary research, and I know you'll be as fascinated as I am to hear them speak. So it now gives me great pleasure to introduce the first of our panel speakers. Now, forgive me for reading the introductions, because I want to get these right, and these are all very impressive people with lots of things listed, so I'm going to go for it now. So our first talk will be a joint one with Professor Mick Grierson and Professor Rebecca Fiebrink. Professor Mick Grierson is a research leader and co-founder of UAL's Creative Computing Institute. His research explores signal processing, machine learning, and information retrieval techniques in the creative arts and industries. Work by his students and research group was instrumental in the development of the field known as creative AI, and hardware and software based on his research have been used by world-leading production companies, tech startups, and artists. Professor Rebecca Fiebrink is also a professor at the UAL Creative Computing Institute. Much of Rebecca's current research combines techniques from human-computer interaction and AI to allow people to apply machine learning more effectively to new problems, such as the design of new digital musical instruments, embodied interactions, and humanities scholarship. The work at UAL Creative Computing Institute aims to support the use of AI and ML technologies through applied co-research methodologies where the purpose is to understand the perspectives and challenges of those most involved in the domain under investigation. In this session, they will talk about their work on transforming collections and how they've developed and contributed to a new understanding of how interactive machine learning approaches to large language models and large multimodal model customization can assist researchers and professionals in GLAM sector to identify and classify particular instances of biases. So please join me in welcoming Rebecca and Mick to the stage.
stand at the lectern. Rebecca's going to sit down because she's got stuff on her mind. I'm just checking. This is the droid, right? It is. Okay, so let's go. What do museums want, and what does AI need from us? So our part of this session is called Doing Machine Learning Differently. And it's a joint presentation we put together. Let's start with the big question. Now, it used to be we would do this talk, or you would do it separately, or I would do it separately, and we'd always have this question, can someone just tell us what AI is? And so we're going to do it. It's much easier to do now than it was when we started this project, because everyone's seen this big transformation, and that changed a lot of things. But let's just get our parameters right. Okay, it's a set of computational techniques for finding and using patterns in data, right? So for example, text, images, video, human activities. Patterns can be used to make predictions. So what animal is in this image? Is this a cat? Is this a dog? Cats and dogs seem to usually figure quite heavily in our workshops explaining how AI works. Maybe, cats, who doesn't love cats, right? But horses too. These are other animals you can search for on the internet. You see the level I'm going for here. So, but the thing is, if you search for a horse, you get a picture of a horse. That's okay as long as it's got a tag. But what about if we want a machine learning system that knows what a horse might look like? Okay, so this is now something which is much easier to do than it used to be. It used to be that we would do this in the lab and we'd get systems that were pretty good. They've gradually got very, very good, and now they're better than most people. So you might get a picture of a horse, and it might be similar to the one that you started with, or it might be very different, okay? So you can say, okay, what animal is here? It might identify it as a horse, and then say, okay, create me a new image similar to this one. But it might not just be looking at the horse, it might be looking at other things, color distributions, shape distributions, a whole range of different data resources, representations, the type of representation which is being used. And this detail is what's often missing, and this is the detail which we really care about. So we've got a system, for example, we tested this early on in the project, which would allow us to say, okay, well, I've got this image, what is it? What other images are similar? So the big question isn't what's in it, necessarily, it's what does it look like, which is a totally different question. What are the qualities in this image? Is there anything in there that can help us understand the period? Is it abstract? Is it representational? Now, the issue here is that those features aren't always well described. So, but you get the principle, right? In principle, it should be useful, but whether or not it is depends on how well you put it together. So, in transforming collections, what we tried to do was focus on understanding how machine learning can support the project rather than implement search for people, right? We wanted to prototype new systems to specifically address the challenges in the project, which were around notions of bias, transparency, absence, and agency in collections. And this isn't, you're not going to fix that by saying, oh, look, we can label all your horses. That doesn't work. A large part of this is about finding examples, representations, complex representations, layers of representations that researchers we're working with have discovered, and then building systems with them. However, one of the goals is to make it possible for those researchers to do this without us. So it's okay us saying, oh yeah, we can do this for you. What is it you're interested in? All right. And then doing it. But actually, that's not our goal. That was never our goal. Our goal was, how can we build a system to make it possible for those people to do it without us? So one question about this is, how can automation help? And this is the first question, because maybe it doesn't. Another way of thinking about this, another facet of this question is, how can non-experts, I mean non-machine learning experts, automate tasks they're interested in? How can they find out, sit down in front of a machine and go, it should be like this, and get it to do that? So can machine learning offer opportunities to understand how to build tools and services that enable human agency? We want to help people do what they want, not provide solutions. This was the founding principle, not just of this project, but of the way that we work at CCI when we're talking about machine learning. So this is different to how people normally talk about machine learning. And it was definitely very, very different when we started doing this project. You will have heard of this idea of big data. So one way of approaching these issues is to build a more a usable system, but it's difficult. It's sometimes considered very difficult to do this, partly due to assumptions about requirements you need, to do machine learning. Computer scientists will tell you what you need to know in order to do machine learning. They'll tell you, speaking as a professor of computer science, they'll tell you you need huge amounts of data and you just don't have enough. Like, I've had a penny for every time I've said that. You need huge computers you just couldn't feasibly get yourself. You need some, and let's face it, I've got to have that computer. Your computer's just not going to be good enough. You also need, and also the algorithms, I'm sorry to say this, but they're too complicated and they require considerable expertise, so you can't do it. Sorry. You need us. You need us to do it. And this is a kind of big data perspective. And we would just say, is this really true? What is possible with the data you have? What kinds of computing power and expertise is required to use that data? Can existing models also be repurposed and adapted to be more useful to you? We've heard a lot about how these models are not good at certain things. They don't contain representations and ideas. Maybe there's a way for us to make it possible for you, anyone, particularly in the context of collections and archives, to customize these things themselves. So this is our alternative approach. It's an alternative to the monolithic big data approach that data scientists often describe. And we want to talk about these things. Chiefly, we're talking about something called interactive machine learning and repurposing existing models. So, conventional versus interactive machine learning. So conventional machine learning, you decide in advance exactly what should be modeled. So in this case, it will be bias. And you collect a lot of data to train this model, and this is what people tell you have to do. Then an ML researcher engineer will repeatedly tweak the algorithm to make the best model of the data, best in inverted commas. Like, how do they know what's best? Are they experts in the domain? Almost never. And then you deploy the model. And then you have this other approach. I'm standing next to an expert, possibly one of the leading experts in creative interactive machine learning, and she's not talking much, so I'm a bit embarrassed. Okay.
Keep going. You did great.
Thank you. So in interactive ML, domain experts, so that's you, could be you, collect and label data, a bit of data, not a lot, just a bit, to demonstrate how they want models to behave. And then you build an ML model from that data. So it's like you have to work out how to give them, how people will then collect data. And then they then train models on that data interactively, like they would if they were building a system with a computer. Right. So the domain expert, this is the important bit, but this is all important, but this is also difficult sometimes to remember. It's not necessarily going to work first time. So instead of tweaking the algorithm, what you do is you do this. You examine the model's behavior and identify areas for improvement. So you look at it and you go, yeah, that doesn't really fit my expectations of what I think this should be doing. And this is really important when you're talking about something you know a lot about. Right? You use your expertise. And you repeat that as needed, add new data, and steer the model in a useful direction. So you're improving the model. It's not just that you get a bunch of data and you build a model and you wait for ages, and you can do this. And you can then interactively look at the outcome and improve it. And you get this kind of workflow. And this is the way often the systems that we build work. Train the model, run and evaluate the model. Start at the top. Create, edit training examples. Train the model, run and evaluate the model, and then go back to the top. Create, edit training examples, and you keep doing this, and then you end up with a better system. Well, you end up with a system that you feel represents the things you're interested in. So we've built a system that does this in the context of collections in order to help our colleagues, our co-investigators on this project and our partners. And we've called it Collections Transformer. So people working on collections can have their own account. And then the system keeps a record of all your work. So you log in, it says, hey, here's all your stuff. It lists so in this, we call these models analyzers. So you build a system which has an analyzer. The analyzer does the analysis based on what you want it to do. It lists all the analyzers you've created, and it lists all the data sets that you have. You can then create a new analyzer, or use any that you have available in your account. And so for example, this one is the benevolence classifier. Now, I believe, so one of our, Tamina, it was Tamina, this is yours, isn't it? So Tamina built the benevolence classifier in order to understand about things like donations. So it's looking for features related to benevolence and attempts to find information about donations and similar. I mean, I'm paraphrasing, I didn't build the model, it's not my model. Analyzers can then be edited, right? So you can edit the description, which the description itself plays a part in what the analyzer does. You can also then set the labeling guide. This is useful in case you're working on it with team members. And then you can select examples. You can go through your data set and say, well, these are examples of benevolence. And these aren't examples of benevolence. I've got a large data set. It has loads of information in it. I want to select a few. We might select 5 to train the model. We might select more. And then we would say, okay, you know, we've got these. I mean, Jon is going to explain this in more detail later on. We'll have this conversation. But you get the idea. You're looking at the data. You as an expert in your topic are going, this is an example of what I'm looking for, the concept I'm trying to create a machine learning model about. You make your model. Okay, and then you test it to see how it works on your data set. And if it doesn't work the way you want, you refine it. Right? That's the next step. It's not just enough to build it, you've got to refine it. You work with it. This is a professional tool, right? You add or remove examples, change the text descriptions, and then you use it on new data you've not seen. And then hilariously, we have a thing that tells you whether it's good or bad. And we could talk more about how problematic that might be. I want to talk briefly before we move on. I want to talk about the second aspect of this, which is very important, customization of existing models. So remember that thing I said about you don't really need to have a lot of processing power. You don't necessarily need a lot of data. We've talked about how you can do this with a small amount of data. We're also talking about how you can do this on your own machine. You can take an existing model. So you could do this before with lots of different natural language processing models, but now you can do this with large language models and large multimedia models too. You can have them on your machine, or you can use remote ones, and you can provide further training examples to that model. So you can get your examples, and you can show it to this model. And this model is quite powerful, but has all kinds of problems. It's very, very bad at anything in particular. And I think we've all experienced this. The great thing about me being able to talk about this now is I used to say that and no one knew what I was talking about. And now we can say this and everyone's like, yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, I've got ChatGPT. It's pretty bad at anything in particular. Like, ask it something in particular. Right, so we then select examples and we can then get it to know more about the very specific idea that we want. And so this can involve customizing prompts for a large language model or similar models. Or it can actually, you could build this entirely yourself in a bespoke way if you wished. So Collections Transformer does it all behind the scenes. It can use an LLM. It provides a rough general model of how everything works, how text relates to one another. And our prompts provide additional information on a high-level task, as well as individual examples and rationale for the labels. So you're creating a data set which can be used for fine-tuning. And there's a term for this in contemporary machine learning parlance, which is reinforcement learning with human feedback. And so this system allows you to do that interactively behind the scenes. So you can totally retrain a model, for your own task. And that means that you've got the power, when the model fails, to remake it to do the things you think are valuable. Okay, so the benefits are non-computer scientists can design and build new models with the right user interface. Doesn't rely on other people's ideas of what is an important model or what's important to model. It doesn't require huge data sets. The models can be very simple, so you can just have a model which does one thing, one model for one purpose. They can be using hand-picked data, so it's very informative when you use hand-picked data because you're really specifically identifying the use case and determining what the concept is behind it. Domain experts can then improve those models over time and adapt models to new understandings or contexts. If you've got new information, you can improve your model. Got new data, you can improve your model. And the human process of labeling data and evaluating models can change how people think about data, collections that you own, and how you understand your goals. And that is that. Thank you. Should I sit?
Yes. Okay. Our next speaker. Our next speaker is Ananda Rutherford, a researcher with extensive experience in museum collections management. Ananda's research and professional practice focuses on ethical and equitable collections information, the history and role of museum documentation, and the digitisation of museum collections. Her recent work addresses structural racism in museum cataloguing and object description, and the conventions of producing and disseminating collections information. In this talk, she will offer some critical reflections on interdisciplinary working between technology and collections information. Her work compares the process of editing text of publication and dissemination with the potential of machine learning assisted models developed during the Transforming Collections project. She will explore efforts within Tate to reappraise artwork descriptions through a critical, ethical, and anti-racist lens. So please welcome to the stage Ananda.
Hello. So this has ended up as everything I've ever learned during this project, rather than a sort of more analytical approach, or actually telling you properly about my case study, because of the reasons that Mick sort of elucidated on. Actually, the data I gathered was really complicated, and they've got to such a better stage now. I want to do it with the latest version. So we'll gloss over that, my failings. And I wanted to say, listening to Mick, that's such a great setup, and it sounds like a fantastic project, Mick. We should do that. It's really nice to hear it back now, 3 years on from where we started, that we're on the same page. We're trying to do the same things. The small, situated and specific sort of lens through which we're doing things is really there, and it's really heartening. So I just wanted to start. Thank you. Thank you, Jon, as well. I wanted to start by acknowledging, so I think I'm going to be saying very similar things to Mick and Rebecca, but from the kind of collections manager, documentation, cataloguing side of things. But you'll see where there are convergences and where things become disconvergent? I don't know, come apart. So I want to start by acknowledging two key factors which have required careful navigation across this project. The first being the hugely accelerated pace of change in relation to generative AI in terms of development, real-world application, and the hyperbole of museum debates. Media debates. Museum debates have been less hyperbolous. The second is grappling with humanity's knowledge and information as data. Understanding what constitutes a data set, even that is actually quite tricky for me sometimes, and I think it is for a lot of museum professionals, because your collections database is not a usable data set. And we started with, whoa, here's all our crap, you sort it. And it was crap, and it was messy, and you've got to sort it out. Sorry. It's not crap, it's really neat when I've tidied it up. But also there's something really important for me, and I think other practitioners, about resisting the flattening out, the big data solutions, and the dislocation from the actual source, which for many of us is the thing itself, the artist and the thing. That's the core relationship. So much is made of heterogeneous I struggle with these words, so go with me. Much is made of the heterogeneous nature of museum data, and that's how very difficult it is to deal with in computational terms. It's different. We all have different database systems. We all use them differently. We have guidance, not standards, unlike libraries and archives. We put it where we want to because we're museums. At the same time, there is also a pernicious homogeneity in the structural racism of historical object description that manifests in language, narratives, and the privileging of or erasing of certain types of information to maintain the white supremacist status quo. This is the so-called soft diplomacy of museums and culture. So we tread very carefully, navigating these homogeneous, heterogeneous, texts, the texts that we deal with, and the reality of what human design tools can and might do and with them. I also want to explore a bit about how we bridge the apparently yawning conceptual gaps between critical art history, traditional museum practice, and technological innovation. How do we do this when the words we use mean distinctive things within different areas of research and expertise? How do we communicate what the data actually is and means? For example, and I did think we should have called it this, the whole session, the labels for labelling labels, which is actually what this is about. So, for example, labels, data, ontologies are understood and applied to quite different disciplinary ends. Discussions concerning all three have resulted in amusing and confusing divergences. But in some ways, these semantic issues are relatively easy to address. What are the histories, conventions, and practices within our different disciplines, which have taken years of research and experience to grapple with? So in 3 years, I've learned all of AI, and they know all of art history. It's been amazing. Overcoming these disparities has been much of the project's work. When our computer science colleagues, I never know what to call you, technologists, these guys, CCI, talk of data, meaning all data, information and knowledge, the object as data, metadata, paradata, it's hard to think of a complex installation piece or a carefully wrought essay analysing a work of art through this lens. I really struggle with this, and we've had this discussion a couple of times. I just like to say the object is not data. For anyone, just in case you don't know where I am, it's not. Where does the artist, the texture, the colour, the emotional response fit in the binary and pattern learning of algorithmic models? Further, how do we then decode or code and deconstruct the structural racism and bias inherent in our own disciplinary models? And by our own, I mean mine. Further, how do we... Where is the... I've lost my place. Where is the humanity in this machine that we can't quite see the workings of? How are artworks, stories, and people remediated in the digital in a way that isn't reductive, solution-focused, or harmful? But we have made connections by finding the commonalities in our approaches and values, recognising that our habits of analysis, categorisation, ethical concern, criticality, and creativity are much closer than we think. Sounds like a sort of love letter to you guys now, doesn't it? Though it has been a steep learning curve to find common ground and to grapple with the intricacies of disciplines that are often pitted against each other. So, to give a bit of context for the project's focus, we need to start with the premise that in recent years there's been much greater scrutiny and much research on collections information and collections management practices in the GLAM sector. That's galleries, libraries, archives and museums, especially around the persistence of cataloguing language and organisational conventions that repeat and codify colonial, Eurocentric epistemologies, hierarchies, and notions of cultural capital. At the same time, these challenges to the assumed authority and objectivity of museums and galleries have occurred alongside large-scale digitisation over the last 20 years and the subsequent datification of GLAM collections. For those in computer science and digital humanities, GLAM collections appear to provide a wealth of images and a treasure trove of data that can be infinitely tested, explored, analysed and reconfigured to the benefit of all, with all the promise of access, democratisation and knowledge. But it's important to consider how GLAM information and interpretation is produced and understood, and how this understanding changes with the project of cultural heritage digitisation and the advent of data analytics and machine learning at scale. In recent years, again, I'm saying the same thing, but I think it needs sort of reiterating. In recent years, the museum and galleries of Anglophone or culturally Eurocentric countries has been a great deal of anxiety about the catalogue record in the acknowledgement of pejorative language and a persistent imperialist purview. In many cases, the cultural sector has been focused on controlling or correcting words rather than addressing the structural racism that such words signal. Yet the language of discrimination and white supremacy persists in the records and labels, and you can see this with the recent launch of the Museum Data Service. Some cleaning up has occurred, and you can see that on Tate's website. In some records, it's all there, unmediated, and there's a whole debate to have around that, which I'm happy to talk about later, but what the language we use is important. There are millions of texts there are millions of texts, archival records, and labels to be dealt with. How can or should this massive information, remember it's in those crappy database systems, be expediently addressed, and can machine learning help to improve the museum and gallery's contribution to the cultural digital record? Difficulties around this are evidenced in the many and various attempts within the sector to decolonise the database, a phrase which already sounds terribly dated, to edit out the language of prejudice or circumvent offence, at the same time trying to factor in subjectivity, positionality and the anxiety of white fragility, making change or even evidencing the need for change, resulting in a paralysis or overwhelm, and nothing is done, or some things are done, or bits of things are done, but there's never a sort of substantive change. The continuing need to address these issues at an institutional, disciplinary or practice level has been made apparent in the research presented within the Transforming Project, where careful and forensic scrutiny of artists' careers and institutional reception, how the works are acquired, written about, displayed, or not, evidences the complex relationships between artworks, artists and publics, all of which are framed by institutional and social conventions insidiously woven through with structural racism. Can we mobilise machine learning to assist with complex and nuanced analysis and reflect critically to problematise the erasure, overlooking and reductionism that the sector has often applied to the work of minoritized and marginalised artists? The answer, for me, are both yes and no. With this work, we are moving towards an ML tool. I think as the extrapolation from what Mick's demonstrated, we've gone from simple binary questions of fruit or not fruit, which was a particular favourite. But I mean, he did horse or not horse, or just horse. Horse or wrong horse, to the more complicated ones, which some of you who saw the demo this morning would have been about language use, about, Tamina's example is fabulous, about the language of benevolence, but also the bit I was wanting to look at was about the racialised tropes that are nuanced and not necessarily immediately obvious pejoratives and racist terms. So I've lost my place again, hang on. The answer, is both yes and no. And with this work, we are moving towards an ML tool that could help researchers to identify these behaviours in the data sets that they create, and at the same time, to challenge the inherent biases in machine learning and artificial intelligence. If we implement machine learning as a tool of measurement and analysis, as opposed to adopting the pseudo-solutions of generative AI, creating new, better, more information, and we train models, as Mick's described, using interactive machine learning to look for some of the same complex concerns described by our researchers and partners, can we create something that might prompt or provoke curators, researchers, and GLAM's publics to look more closely at what has gone before and the collection's information generated now? In my research, I've explored what approaches can be employed to engage critically and ethically with museum information to tackle structural bias and the hegemony of traditional Western norms of knowledge production and practice. It seems like a no-brainer, the way it's presented in the media, that machine learning could help with this, with its skill at recognising language patterns at scale. The machines can do the spotting and changing, and all will be well, all solved. Well, again, yes, and no. The exposure of digitisation and the affordances of machine learning can't solve the problems of content. The problem then is with the data, the information and the knowledge, and the conventions and contexts of its production. And this is still where the work lies. So a while back, and you may have heard this if you've heard me speak before, I talked about 5 areas that need to be addressed in how we write about things, when we catalogue, when we produce interpretation and object description. And on reflection, these have turned out for me to be the same considerations needed to address concerns about generative AI and large language models. So firstly, there is language, the words we use and how we write. And remember, I'm talking both about completely not comparative things really, but the whole of AI and large language models and labels for paintings. the words we use and how we write, how we deal with harm and offence without denying the historical or even contemporary use of racist words. Tone, professionalism, descriptive neutrality and translation all come into play to construct the objective, authoritative museum voice. This is something that ML is increasingly good at spotting, but we still must do the work to teach it. Pointing towards the machine again. Sorry, the app. Subject and content is the second one. What and who we choose to write about, which artists, topics and material are privileged in terms of publication, expertise and resources, and used as representative of the collection. Again, machine learning can potentially spot these and highlight absence and discrepancies, but also, why does it keep offering us up the same stuff, and why, when we have to have an eye to that? So knowledge creation and production needs to consider who is involved, who is listened to, who can get access to information, objects and archives, and who is allowed to use the material, who participates in knowledge generation. And these questions apply equally, again, to any critical analysis of machine learning. I've got 4 and 5 to go, I'm going to speed them up. Cataloguing, practice and systems. Practice and systems always need analysing for both things, but looking at the tools we use. But also there's context and history. How did we get here? How did the large language model get created? What was the visual model looking at? And people don't often ask these questions. So understanding the history of how we got here and the context in which information sets are actually created is really important. So for museums, it's institutional biographies, institutional structure, but that applies too to whatever business or small startup or mad scientist or Silicon Valley bros who are actually doing this work. That's my imagination of the computer sphere. I'm really sorry, it's quite dated. So there is always a duality at the core of GLAM collections as data. The technology is perpetually new and innovative, yet at the same time continuously reenacting established patterns of selective representation, discriminatory valorization, and narrative control, encoding and repeating political relations and social organization. The challenge here is to look at how this is different from changes or how it replicates more traditional cataloguing conventions. Can AI produce new or different knowledge about the object? Does it change understanding, and is this reflected in the digital record? What happens to collections when they're remediated within what Nana Thalstrup calls the regime of cultural memory? And now I always credit this to Rupika, and I hope it is her, because it's I don't know where she is, it's the digital cultural record, which I think is a really, really important idea as we perpetually publish our information online. What does it add and what does it offer? As the work has gone on in discussions and learning about our respective disciplines, we've come to a common set of things we want to do and don't want to do with this work, challenging concerns and conventions as they arose. The CCI team have always started with the idea of human-centred interaction, as you've heard, and the recognition and constant involvement with people at the core part of this work. But understanding the specific issues of this data resulted in 3 key areas of focus, which Mick's actually spoken to address in both the information, content, and the technology. And that was context, which I've talked about, transparency, or more accurately, accountability, and absence. And this is a much shorter version of the 5 I gave you earlier. So what we wanted to do is we wanted to look at and value, which is core, small, specific, situated data sets, which is essentially what collections information is, and to try and be as clear as possible about transparency and context. We've been cautious around generative AI, though not all generative AI is bad. It doesn't have its own acronym, does it? That, like, not all men. But as explicitly problematic. It's not as explicitly problematic, say, as ChatGPT or Gemini. Above all, we wanted to avoid the hubris of technological solutionism. That is, the ambition is not to eradicate issues of bias. I mean, it is to eradicate, and we want to do this, absence and bad writing, but rather to develop tools which facilitate and support critical thinking, close reading, and finding the evidence. And I'd add a 4th to these principles, which is reflexiveness, actually. So we've got context, transparency, absence, and reflexivity. Yeah, I should have done slides. There's just a lot of lists. And that is the tool we've developed. It's designed to evidence patterns rather than make claims from them, to require interaction and critical thinking about the data being used and the mechanisms of machine learning. There is a circularity in it that prompts you to think about what the machine does, and to expose both the data, the technology, the technological tools, and the individuals creating and using them to scrutiny. Limitations of time prevent me going into my own case study, which I think I am running out of time, aren't I? So I might just leave that. So the couple of last things that I've been thinking about is about art and artefact cataloguing, description and interpretation as forms of mediation of the object, but also that this mediating process is not transparent. There is always a level of reduction in translation, but we are never very clear about what the cataloguer is doing, or what has been changed. And this seems to me loosely comparable with the lower dimensional sort of latent representation in machine learning modelling. And these guys are probably just laughing up their sleeves as I try to grapple with these concepts, and don't worry about it if you don't get them. I don't really either. A similar process of compression, lowering dimensionality, occurs through digitisation of an image of a work of art. Nods, yeah. Okay, so in the cataloguing of a work of art, there are inevitable levels of reduction and classification is always reductive, in play in all spheres of parsing and understanding that risk a thing, a work of art, or an object, or a document being reduced to what it is similar to, rather than the complex social, physical, and emotional interactions of materiality, agency, and effect. In this project, the key shift was recognising that digital solutions to humanity's problems were not the path we wanted to follow, and we were allowed a freedom to explore how each side could productively inform and enrich the other, not just at a disciplinary level, but in practice. But this is the Debbie Downer bit, I remain cautious and concerned about the datafication of collections information and knowledge and collections as data, and how that sometimes drives our work in the GLAM sector. It's been my whole career doing digitisation. And AI is very similar in that push to use the information. I think it's important to note that perhaps the most significant outcome of our finding has not been the tool itself, but furthering understanding of machine learning and the process of engaging with the technology properly in relation to art and history. ML is not, for me, a solution, and I've put yet, but I don't think it is, to most things, and certainly not to complex questions and analysis in arts and humanities inquiry. The push towards generative AI as a tool for producing cataloguing text, I believe, is misguided. For me, in this specific area, generative AI, I don't know whether I'm going to read this. It functions like, okay, I don't know whether you get this when you use something like ChatGPT or Gemini, which have been participating in a test on it recently with Google. For me, in this specific area, generative AI, when it generates new text, functions like the leading questions of a TV medium, primarily reflecting back the clues you give, speculating through crude generalizations, and reconfiguring the biases you already suspect. The texts it produces are like a lot of poor journalism, or rather journalism. If you ever actually, yeah. I'll just get my coat there. It does. I mean, that's how it reads to me. You know this. When you read the paper and you know anything about it, if it's about your local town, you go, yeah, no, the road doesn't go that way. That shop is not actually on that corner, and the weather's never like that. It produces that level. The gaps and errors are really apparent when you know. So machine learning models and products require the same ethical and critical analysis as the GLAM practices and texts we seek to disrupt, and the same scrutiny as our sources and authorities and institutions need. The human is never written out, but we must engage to continuously write the human in. Artificial intelligence is actually an argument for more and better writing, an argument for art history and cataloguing. Otherwise, we simply perpetuate the cycle of rubbish in, rubbish out that we already see across the internet.
Well, that was an amazing talk. Fabulous, thank you. Sorry, 2 amazing talks. And we also have a wonderful panel assembling on the right, but we're 1 person short. And that's because our 3rd and final speaker is about to hit the deck, and that's Dr. Jon Gillick, a researcher, music producer, and composer. He joined the Transforming Collections project as a research fellow in UAL's Creative Computing Institute. Gillick's research explores technical, social, and artistic considerations that come into play during creative interactions between people and algorithms, and the goal of designing meaningful, playful, and inclusive experiences. Jon's talk will explore what it means to put the subtle, nuanced choices of machine learning practice into the hands of art historians and museum professionals and ask them to adopt unfamiliar, foreign ways of thinking. He says that to teach a machine to find patterns in collections, collection objects, and interpretive material forces us to discard our assumptions and redefine some of the basic elements that constitute a collection from the ground up. He will critically question the conventional understandings of machine learning as principally a tool for achieving efficiency or finding solutions, and instead reveal desire and potential to use ML as a tool in other ways, including supporting close reading, argumentation, and critical thinking. So I'm now going to welcome Jon to the stage.
Thank you for the introduction. Thanks everyone for staying till the end of the day. It's actually, I usually like to get the talk out of the way at the beginning of the day, but in this case, I'm really grateful to go at the end because I get to lean on all of the hours of setup that everyone has done already, which makes my job a lot easier, especially as I try to get like concrete and jump into specific examples of using a technology. It's impossible to sort of deal with all of the issues underneath the surface in 20 minutes or so. So having sat through the previous few hours of and got your minds around a lot of the big issues that underlie all this stuff as we try to get like a little more concrete in this session. Yeah, I'm just grateful to all of you for the setup. So I decided to go with this analogy for today that about teaching AI how to make a peanut butter sandwich. This has sort of been over the past like 2 years or so. I keep coming back to this, but I have been reluctant to talk to anyone else about it because I feel like there should be something more serious or, I don't know, there should be something that feels more appropriate for the venue and the occasion other than a peanut butter sandwich. But I feel like this one just really has worked the best, and so I hope that you'll agree with that. I'll come back to that in a moment. But the real goal of what I want to try to get across is trying to get as practical as I can about what transforming could mean in practice. We've talked about transforming collections, and you've read a lot, heard a lot throughout the day. And we've talked about how machine learning interacts with collections in a variety of ways. But I want to hopefully leave you at the end of the day with some examples of the path that we've been slowly and through a winding road kind of moving down about how we might actually take all the stuff we've talked about and put it towards a direction where we make sort of real-world interventions to the things that we do, and in a way that we can sort of be proud of and stand behind. Yeah. So okay. What kind of? Here's some examples. Other people have talked about different examples, and you'll hear a lot more specifics if you're back at the conference tomorrow. But especially when we're looking at collections through the machine learning lens, some of the most common like interventions that we hear about people talking about are things like object descriptions, as Ananda has been talking about, maybe things like acquisitions or collections policies, metadata and tagging. These are like concrete sites where we could actually make a real world change to how we do things. And this sort of like, this is where I'm grateful that I've had a lot of setup, so I don't have to do so much work around explaining like this question of why AI and machine learning and qualifying it in so many ways. But a lot of times when someone comes to me in the context of like a tech demo, their assumption is that I'm going to give them something that will help them process the massive backlog of of information that they know that they haven't documented, or they haven't written object description, or there's lots of gaps in their database or their website. And they've heard about AI and machine learning, that this might be a solution for them. It might help them work faster, more effectively, more efficiently. And so some of the earlier presentations have given really powerful, compelling examples of other ways that AI fails us. I want to add one more to this that's really grounded in the context of what this app could have been, what the alternative to the sort of interactive machine learning approach we've focused on could have been, and what other folks are. A conversation is still very real and happening right now. And so here's an image that is drawn from, I got this image from an article written by Ananda and Anjali a couple of years ago. I took this image and I uploaded it to a chatbot, something like ChatGPT, and I asked it sort of, what is this painting about? This is sort of like when people think about the intersection of museums and machine learning for the first time, this is the kind of thing that they are looking for. And so there's a lot of work to kind of navigate into a different direction. But here's really concretely like what happens with this specific example. So what I've gotten back from the AI system is, it says, the painting depicts a woman in a white dress standing next to a dog. The woman appears to be petting the dog, which is positioned to her left. The scene is set in a room with a chair located in the background. A vase can be seen on the surface nearby. The woman's elegant attire and the presence of the dog create a sense of warmth and companionship in the painting. What you may have noticed is that there's another person in the image. The boy on the other side, who is black, is not mentioned at all. So he's been erased in the process of this caption that was written by AI. And we have no way of knowing what else has been erased, or whether, if I didn't point it out just now, whether the average person would have noticed that and picked up on it. So we can see immediately that just the idea, like this kind of gives a visceral experience of what we would be dealing with if we were to take a collections database and run this through at scale, an AI system as it's presented to us. And this is a real thing that a lot of people are talking about doing. And just one last point on this, like this is often what we hear from the media or from sort of companies that are developing big AI systems, is that like, yeah, we know it has these problems, but it will get better. Like, don't worry about it. You should just start using it, and like we'll fix the problems, you know, in the coming months, years, whenever. There's lots of people to go and read to get into the details of this, but one visual way of sort of summarizing this is that this is kind of what it's like to try to fix all of the problems that crop up using the approaches, the common approaches to training machine learning. Like we just can't trust it to do things with this level of autonomy, and expect that it's not going to create problems that we are unaware of. Okay, so just sort of to summarize what we are going for, we ended up working on, you know, through a series of like lots of collaborative workshops with our colleagues, our art historian colleagues and museum professional colleagues, kind of learning from them about how we might design assistive tools for thinking and working, and just sort of building on a foundation of what we know from ethics in machine learning, and basically the rest of the talk I kind of want to just give you like a little bit of a taste of what it actually feels like to train one of these things. And then we'll zoom out to talk about things that we found from testing this out with a number of different people. So yeah, the work really lies in kind of zooming in to find these micro level patterns and choosing which things you're going to look for, curating and labeling your own data sets and your data. And okay, back to the peanut butter sandwich. I think that, so as I've gone through this process over and over again of trying to explain either through sort of a prompt, as we've come to know the word with large language models, or through providing a set of examples, as with machine learning before large language models. Now we have both those options. As I've gone through and watched lots of other people struggle with how to communicate their understanding of a concept to a computer, or their understanding of like a goal or something that they want to do, trying to communicate to this entity, which is the computer. Just really, I realized through the process that I learned this lesson in 5th grade when my teacher, Mr. Wolf, gave us a homework assignment that we needed to write instructions on how to make a peanut butter sandwich. And every student in the class had to go home, and here's sort of a simple example of what you might write, had to go come up with a set of instructions for how to do it. And then Mr. Wolf was there in front of the room. There was maybe about 20 students or so, and he had a loaf of bread, and he had a jar of peanut butter and a plate and a knife, and he followed our instructions one by one. He went through and made everyone a peanut butter sandwich, and he interpreted our instructions extremely literally, like as literally as he could. I don't remember whether he ever explained what the point of the lesson was, but it stuck with me for sure, because that's one of the only things that I remember from his class. So like the way it went basically was somebody would write something like this: put 2 slices of bread on a plate, spread some peanut butter on the bread, stick the bread together. So he'd say, okay. So he would do step 1, he'd take 2 slices of bread, put it on the plate. And at step 2, he would take the closed jar of peanut butter and rub it on the bread. And then mush the bread together. And so that person who brought this set of instructions would get 2 pieces of bread with no peanut butter. And then, so we were like, oh yeah, I guess I left some things out. So maybe another person who was a little more detailed might have gotten that first step about you need to open the jar, like otherwise you're not going to get any peanut butter on the bread. So maybe they have some more steps, like put 2 slices of bread on the plate, open the jar, stick the knife in the jar, wiggle it around, carefully lift a gob of peanut butter onto the bread. So there's a lot of steps that it would take to get him to do it. And then spread the gob of peanut butter on the bread, stick it together. But then maybe when you get to step 5, notice that step 5 doesn't say which bread. It doesn't point out that you're supposed to put it on the same bread that is already on the plate. And so he would just go back to the loaf of bread, which is still in the bag, and spread the peanut butter on top of the bag. And then what you end up with still is just a bag with peanut butter on it and 2 pieces of bread. So like he went through 20 people or so, and I think only 1 or 2 people successfully made got a proper peanut butter sandwich. So this is basically like this is kind of what it feels like to train an interactive machine learning model. And yeah, that's what I was saying. Gotta highlight the bread that's already on the plate, like come on. And this thing just gets longer and longer, and through the process, like, it's interesting. Like making a peanut butter sandwich might not be the activity that we're all most excited about, but doing this like really forces us. It just like stops us in our tracks. The way that he took the closed jar of peanut butter and rubbed it on the bread. because like most people wouldn't do that. But AI will very happily do that, and it exactly does something very similar to what Mr. Wolf was doing. Still don't know why he did it, but it does something very similar. I learned so much from that exercise. Like I examined in such detail about what it really means to like I had this appreciation for jars and just all these things we take for granted, all the assumptions we have. Like it was a really, really powerful exercise. Okay, so teaching AI to make sandwiches. Basically, we need to make all these decisions. Every example of teaching a machine to do a specific thing, you have to kind of go through this process. And this is quite similar to how I feel the experience of interactive machine learning is like. You gotta find where the fillings are. Like you might start to make the peanut butter sandwich, but then realize that you ran out of peanut butter. So like, where are you gonna go get some more peanut butter? That is a 90% of the time, that is exactly the problem. When we try to find some examples to label, we can't find any examples because they're not there in our data set. So we have to like leave the room and come back another time and realize that we need to like go examine what we're working with in the first place, and just kind of do this cycle of repetitive process. So we just want to show a few examples in sort of like increasing order of level of what it takes to kind of engage with thinking about it. Like these are, if we showed some of these in our workshop this morning, and if you come back on Friday at Tate Britain, we're going to have the app up to play with these examples again. So something like this: how colorful is this artwork? And you get some examples. You label. I think this is a 5, and then you look at the ones where the machine tries to follow you. And in this third example, I said this. I labeled this as a 5. I think Polo did this one. Polo labeled this as a 5. This third image, the one on the bottom, like this is the most color. Color is very important along this spectrum of understanding this image. You really need to pay attention to color. But the machine said, oh, this is a 3. So once you engage with this, it forces you to like stop and be like, okay, what do I mean by my scale of 1 to 5? And how am I thinking about this image? And so you're just sort of like confronted with this. A lot of people have. It's interesting to like hear all the other talks and then give my talk, because a lot of people have described the same feeling in different ways, and everyone has different analogies of what it's like to see your own biases and assumptions like reflected back to you in a very jarring, straightforward way. But through the process of something like that, and the goal of this is not just to sort of start with these like toy, very concrete examples where like most people could kind of agree. But the goal of this is to work towards the big questions of the project. And so level 2 might be something like this. Does this text use understandable language? This comes from one of our partners at Art UK, was looking for this. Can you identify inaccessible or archaic language that would be difficult for a museum visitor to understand? And so in the process, you sort of have to interrogate your own definition of what you understand. What are you looking at when you name this concept, and you go through multiple rounds of kind of rewriting it and trying to find better examples that embody your definition of this concept. And then finally, like, I'm not going to put up the text because we need at least like an hour to discuss this, and I don't have that much time. But we've talked about we've used this example in workshops with groups where we asked people to decide whether an artist's voice was represented in a description of their artwork. And it was very difficult to get people to agree on what we even meant by artist voice. And so we started like this workshop that we ran over a year ago, trying to get people like with a bit of a technical perspective, like by the end of an hour, you're all going to have labeled enough examples that you're going to have taught the machine how to do it. But by the end of the hour, like no one had labeled enough examples to train the machine at all because everyone was just arguing about what artist voice means. And so like the result is that, what turns out to be useful about this is, well, sometimes it's useful to like debate a concept and discuss it, but sometimes it's useful to just take ownership and sort of transparency of like, this is what I mean by it as an individual or a small group that can agree on some sort of consensus between you and be like, we're gonna commit to this definition of a concept and we're gonna go with that and let it evolve over time and have it be a changing thing that we can have many versions. So this is like another just picture of our interface where we have, even with a concept that, especially something that's a bit more abstract or more hard to pin down. What we envision and what we're seeing with people is going through lots of versions as your thinking changes. So, yeah, just to finish up, I just want to share like a few. One of the most interesting things that we learned through this process was like after we've done all the hard work of kind of getting on the same page about what our goals are and what we're doing and what we're not doing, what kind of questions are we left with that our colleagues and our partners want to ask with machine learning? So things about interpretation, framing, representation, things about evidencing sort of intuitive ideas or things that we kind of know but don't know how to make an argument for, or maybe we need to communicate something to stakeholders that don't really want to hear what we have to say. This turns out to be kind of a useful tool for collecting evidence in support of an argument. And also, the typical stuff we might expect around bouncing ideas around how you define concepts about an artwork, like material qualities, structure, ways of writing. I think last thing to say is just sort of to summarize with a very short list of like the main challenges and recommendations or suggestions I could share of things to think about if you want to adopt something like this in an actual real world situation is, well, one, AI hype and solutionism is a constant distraction and needs to be countered on a regular basis. Everything takes longer because even if you had a conversation with someone and you revisit the same conversation a month later, in that month they've heard a lot of AI hype and solutionism, and so have you. And you kind of need to like process that before you can get back on board with this approach, because we're sort of resisting a lot of forces by trying to do it in this way. And it really takes a lot of time and commitment to learn how to train your own machine learning. As I was trying to make that point with the peanut butter sandwich example. But we have seen some interest and potential for it in the sector. It does feel like there's something there. It's not just like a fun sort of exercise. It does seem to be like a really practical way of people structuring their work and their thinking when they're faced with a really big, uncertain problem, like the questions in the project that we're thinking about, and they don't know where to start. Like this sort of gives you a way in of getting really specific, and you can kind of going through the workflow seems to be useful for some of the people that are really trying to address these questions that Transforming Collections is about. And that's it. I will stop there. Thank you.